My experience while in the Marine Corps. Long read. So this takes place back in 2005. While serving at the U.S. Embassy in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. One morning after working my night shift at the embassy, I returned home to the Marine House. The U.S. Marines lived in a local residence bought and paid for by the U.S. Embassy. It was a 3-story home in what locals would consider a upscale neighborhood, by Ivorian standards. The home was fairly large and had a pool, gym, laundry room and driver's room on the first floor and housed 5 U.S. Marines that were tasked with protecting the U.S. Embassy and its personnel. On this morning I was pretty tired. I had just arrived in country and was still getting used to the night shift work. Lots of Red Bulls. I walked up to my room that was on the 3rd story of the house. It was a relatively medium-sized room with a bathroom attached and one large window in the bedroom that was fitted with heavy curtains to keep the day light out during the day so we could sleep. I was crashing hard from all the Red Bulls. I managed to take my uniform off and get straight into bed. It wasn't long before I reached that state of mind where you're half asleep and half awake. I believe I was at the point where I started dreaming when some sort of sixth sense told me, "You have to wake up." I remember opening my eyes and staring at the opposite wall at the foot of my bed. The room was dark, and I was still half asleep as I scanned from the left side of my room to the right. I recall my eyes concentrating on the daylight that was shooting down the side of the wall towards the corners of my room. As my eyes reached the right far corner, I stopped and focused on a dark spot in the corner of the room. I couldn't make out what it was, but the light abruptly stopped before hitting the corner of the room. As I stared at this dark spot, I realized it was a silhouette of a person. It was tall, and I could make out the outline of shoulders and a head. My first instinct was that I was dreaming, but after a few seconds my vision cleared up and the silhouette was still standing there. As I focused harder on it, I realized it wasn't disappearing, and the realization that something was standing there hit me. I had a quick flash thought of, WTF is that? When all of a sudden this shadow figure with red eyes, that I can see clearly now, rushed forward and started choking me. Still to this days I remember the grip it had and the flash of heat I felt run down the back of my neck all the way down to my feet. I closed my eyes tightly, and was paralyzed. I couldn't move. The level of fear that struck me was immense. After about 10 seconds I felt this grip letting go, and as soon as I could move, my first action was to reach for my K-bar knife I kept on top of my nightstand. I quickly stood up ready to stab whatever the fuck was in my room. The next couple seconds were me tearing my curtains open and clearing the room and restroom and repeating, WTF. WTF. Jesus Christ, WTF. Exclamation mark quote. My room was completely empty. I went from attack mode to quickly trying to convince myself it was just the side effect of this medication I was on. One of the cons of working in an African post was that we were ordered to take mefloquine, an anti-malaria medication, by our command. One of the side effects clearly stated was the possibility of night terrors. Regardless, I couldn't stay in that room. I ended up falling asleep in the common area with the TV turned on. Fast forward 5 months and we, the Marines, move out of that home and move into the new embassy compound that had just been constructed. Me and another Marine decided to have a movie night and watch The Exorcism of Emily Rose, creepy movie. When it was done, I walked into the kitchen and ran into Sammy, our butler. Sammy was in charge of doing our laundry and prepping our meals throughout the week. He was amazing. When he wasn't working for us, he spent his time as a Catholic priest at a local Catholic church. Having the movie fresh in my mind, I asked him, "Me, Sammy, if we got possessed by the devil, could you perform an exorcism?" Sammy: "Of course, sir. I do them quite often. Many bad spirits here in Côte d'Ivoire." Me: "Seriously, Sammy?" Quote. Sammy: "Yes, sir. Many evil here." Me: "When we moved in, did you bless our new house?" Sammy: "Yes, of course, sir. This is a very good home." Pause. "Not like the old house. That was a very bad house." Instantly I went cold and asked him to explain. Sammy, the old house was possessed by 3 demonic spirits. He then goes on to tell me that one morning while he was doing our laundry in the basement of our old home, he looked into the marine gym and saw 3 shadow figures with red eyes standing side by side in the corner of the room. He grabbed his crucifix and began to pray before they vanished. He then instructed me to go speak with Joey, one of our Ivorian marine drivers. I hauled ass to find Joey. Joey was a 49-year-old father of 8 who had worked for 15 years as the embassy marine driver. Joey tells me one night after dropping off one of the Marines, he returned to the driver's room where he tried to get some sleep. He was awakened by something whispering his name. When he opened his eyes, something grabbed him and started choking him. He said he swung his arms wildly but couldn't hit the thing that was choking him. When it finally released him, he ran out of the driver's room, hopped into the armored suburban marine vehicle and drove to the U.S. Embassy where he remained the rest of the night. He never again stepped foot in the driver's room. He told me that some time later our gardener accidentally dug up a juju box with bones and voodoo witchcraft trinkets inside. Apparently somebody had cursed the property, according to him. As if the story couldn't get weirder, I headed inside the U.S. Embassy later that day to speak with my GYSGT about some work. Our conversation turned to what I had just learned about our old house. Gunny had this look on his face. He reached up to his logbooks and pulled out a incident report binder from a few years prior and pulled out a report where a former Marine at the post had reported an intruder in his room that had shocked him and disappeared. He slept in the room I slept in. The Marine was convinced it happened to the point an official U.S. Embassy report had to be filed. Thanks for taking the time to share. Very well described. Wow, voodoo stories have always fascinated. One place I lived in was very haunted and all around bad energy. I would wake up to a shadow person in the corner of my room staring at me. It didn't have red eyes though, and only once I woke up with it leaning over me, it grabbed my knee and said, "Pay attention." Long shot here, but are you Roman's sister? No, I'm not. What's the story with that? Roman was a mate of mine, from a long time ago, with a story very similar to yours. It's comforting to know it didn't just happen to me. I'm glad that old memory brings you comfort. During that time, Roman's parents were having a nasty divorce, and things were not going well for his family in general. Our patrol guide was convinced that Roman's family was the victim of a voodoo, witchcraft spell, specifically, a Santeria trabajo. I'll look that up. I'm sorry they went through that. Mine was terrifying too, and I too was going through a bad time. Hopefully they are well now. Thanks for your service. That had to be so scary. Sorry you had to experience that, along with performing your duties. It must have been stressful. One time, I had something extremely terrifying happen while I was in bed. Something started swooshing around me and I couldn't move. It started from my toes and worked towards my head, like if someone was being wrapped for mummification. I prayed as hard as possible and it ended up leaving. I've had sleep paralysis before as well. Both were so creepy. Man, I was thinking this had all the markings of a horrific sleep paralysis experience, but having all the separate accounts to back it up. That's really terrifying stuff. I'm glad it never seemed to go beyond choking enough to scare. Ute. I was in from 0610, my husband 0514. When he was in Dubai, he actually had an experience with jinn. I'll see if he can retell me the story to share here since I all but forgot about it. I was initially going to say you had sleep paralysis, but with the similarities in stories, I believe it. Semper Fi Devil. Jinn? I've only heard some stories and lore about jinn. That's crazy. That would make a great post. Africa is known for many voodoo and it is scary. The incident report binder gave me the chills more than anything. I've specifically asked to see incident reports at old historical hotels I've stayed. Uncanny so many of those places actually have them. Sure does legitimize such occurrences when reported by many PPL over time. Great stories, scary shit, especially when Gunny confirmed the bad juju he experienced. Rough energy surrounding the embassy. Sounds right for any spaces that experience warfare, dissonance, strife, negative energy. Thanks for sharing. Sammy, sorry, when Sammy related that ghosts existed where you lived. Can confirm. I lived in Liberia for 4 years. Next door to Ivory Coast. Bad juju abounds there and it can be contagious. It seems to jump from person to person and there is no limit to the weirdness. Tip: if you happen to find a bunch of chicken feet tied together, don't touch it or pick it up. Don't even poke it with a stick. Just run. I did a quick jump over to Monrovia, Liberia as well. Definitely an interesting, dangerous place. Tears of joy.